Now, to carry on our State of Volunteering showcase, we've got now 4 panelists to speak to the report. And so they're going to give you a 3-minute sort of cut on what they think is top of their mind when they engaged with the report. And first of all, going to introduce Kylee Bates, and then she'll have 3 minutes, then I'll introduce Nicola and Sasha, then Tracey. So let me introduce Kylee to start. Kylee is CEO of Ardoch, a children's education charity whose vision is that every child's potential is realised through full participation in education. In 2018, her team mobilised more than 1,700 volunteers to reach more than 15,000 children and young people through their educational support programs. Kylee is also the immediate past president of IAVE, which is the International Association of Volunteer Effort, for which she served 6 years, promoting, strengthening and celebrating volunteering worldwide. Good morning, Kylee. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning. Thanks, Scott, and thanks, everybody. It's a great opportunity to be part of this panel and this launch today. I'd like to thank Uncle Bill for his welcome to country and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which various lands we might all be meeting on today. I know from the participant list, we've got people from different parts of the country, so it's nice to see that. I really am delighted to be part of this panel. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Volunteering Victoria and the researchers on it. This is exactly the sort of work that is the remit of a really effective peak body, or what globally we would refer to as a volunteering leadership organisation. And I'd like to commend the Victorian Government and the Parliamentary Secretary for their commitment to developing a volunteering strategy, investing in a report like this and recognising the importance of it to underpin a strategy going forward. I think it's not only a good report, but a really timely one. Firstly, when you're about to embark on the development of a strategy on volunteering for the state, it is a pretty good idea to have a baseline of where we're at, what we might want to change and why that change is necessary. Secondly, though neither Volunteering Victoria nor the researchers probably anticipated this when the research was commissioned, we're now at a pretty unique time in our state. As, thanks to yesterday's announcements, we seriously begin to contemplate the reality of what our state's recovery will look like through a COVID normal way of living, working and volunteering. One of the things that I would observe is that volunteers, regardless of sector, will play a critical role in Victoria's recovery from the effects of the pandemic going forward, in the same way that volunteers have always done in response to every community disaster and in pursuit of organisations' missions in times that are complex and ambiguous. However, for that role to be optimised, it is critical that it be expressly acknowledged and supported, both directly to volunteers in terms of recognising and enabling their contributions, but also supporting the organisations like Ardoch and all of those represented here today that involve volunteers to do so in a meaningful and professional way. There's a few things that I'd like to highlight from the report that I think are really strategically important for us all to think about in the context of volunteers in Victoria and the effect of COVID-19. There is, of course, the fundamental issue of ensuring that volunteers are an equal stakeholder in the development of COVID-safe plans that will enable volunteering to restart and to continue at pace. But beyond this, what struck me is the percentage of people who volunteer in their local community, a huge number. So as the conversation about urban hubs and the future role of the Central Activity District here in Melbourne takes place, this is really important for us to consider and understand what it means for our organisations, especially as there may be differential rates of volunteering among some communities and in the communities that we need to serve. I think that the fact that the third highest rate of motivation for volunteering given by volunteers was social connection. So what role will this play and how do we as organisations facilitate it as a socially starved population starts to think about volunteering again? And what will the impact of the loss of the international student population mean for those organisations who'd really begun to tap into this great pipeline of young volunteers wanting to make a contribution to the community that they were temporarily calling home? And importantly, how do we leverage this great economic data to create even more value for the communities we serve and volunteers themselves? I'm really looking forward to the discussion. There's some great data in the report, and I really would commend you to read it in full. So thanks for having me. I look forward to the discussion.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kylee, for your introduction. You raised some great points, and we're grateful to have you. Nicola, thanks very much. If you could join us now. So Nicola, welcome. Nicola is Director of Inclusive Communities, Disability and Communities branch at the Department of Health and Human Services. Nicola is an experienced public service executive with expertise in social policy, intergovernmental relations, governance and strategy. Her roles have included state and Commonwealth central agency experience. And might I say, Nicola has been integral to getting state government buy-in to invest in the state of volunteering. We're very grateful for those high-level, robust conversations we had at the start, Nicola. Really thank you for your support and for being here this morning.
Thank you, Scott. And firstly, I apologise for a lack of virtual background. I'm having, my computer is just quite frankly too old, and I'm sure there's a joke in there about public service and its IT investment, but we'll leave it there. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the many lands on which we're meeting and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to pay my respects to Uncle Bill Nicholson and any other Aboriginal elders on the call today. So we're really pleased to be invited to be on this panel, and very excited about the launch of the State of Volunteering report. Before I talk a bit about what it means to us, I do want to talk a little bit about what we've been doing in the Department of Health and Human Services to support volunteerism in Victoria. So my portfolio is the Inclusive Communities portfolio. It spans a broad range of community areas. So there's community participation, volunteering, the Office for Disability, Economic Inclusion and Diversity, which includes responding to the needs of LGBTIQ and culturally diverse communities. I was very interested to hear Paul's answering of the question about the responses of diverse communities to the State of Volunteering report. We also do work on addressing social isolation and loneliness and promoting social connection, and very much agree with Kylee. This is something we need to think about. So as the focus of inclusive communities, as it says in the title, it's about promoting and supporting inclusive and accessible Victorian communities. And for us, volunteers and volunteerism are essential for all aspects of community participation, community activation, as well as supporting essential services. And because of this, strengthening volunteering is a real priority for the Victorian Government, which it has committed to a new Victorian volunteer strategy. So we have been working on the strategy, though our work on it was paused during COVID. And as work on lots of things were paused and lots of change happened because of COVID, but that of course doesn't mean that we've stood still. As you all know, COVID has had a huge impact on all facets of the society, economy and community life, and including on community and community members and organisations that rely on volunteers to deliver a range of activities and services. And we've all been required to respond and adapt in a really dynamic and fast-moving environment. So the volunteering team in the department has focused on developing information to encourage volunteering through providing information about opportunities to support the community and advice on how to stay safe for prospective and current volunteers. I think COVID has also been an opportunity. It's enabled us to fast track and trial new ways of promoting volunteerism. As you heard from the Parliamentary Secretary, the Premier recently announced back in August a new statewide volunteer portable credentialing and role matching system, We Volunteer, which is being led by Volunteering Victoria. Since the launch of We Volunteer, I understand more than 1,600 Victorians have registered their interest and created a volunteer worker profile, which is just great. And over 30 charities and organisations are looking to support Victorians during this time and have advertised, I think it's something like 250 roles on the platform. So we've got a broad, diverse range of organisations such as Vic Roads, Victorian Council of Churches, Emergency Ministry and the Ballarat Foundation. As you also heard from Parliamentary Secretary, the government is also funding 13 volunteer support organisations to help design the roles. And I understand that the application process is concluded, and hopefully we'll be able to congratulate the successful organisations soon. So while we've been in COVID response, we are now starting to think about moving back into thinking about what does COVID normal look like, and how can we get back to working on, the volunteer strategy. And this is where we come back to what the State of Volunteering report really means to us. As those responsible for developing and working on the strategy, we're really hungry for any information, evidence and analysis that we can get to help us build a picture of what is happening in volunteering, what the issues are, and what options will best enhance volunteering in Victoria. And we're gathering information from a range of sources. So we've been running an online consultation where we're seeking insights into the challenges and opportunities facing volunteers, community members, managers of volunteers, organisations and community groups. So there are 2 online surveys on Engage. The first survey is around community life and volunteering and is open for submissions from all members of the public. And the second survey is about volunteering leadership and support. We've already had over 1,700 people fill in the survey. If you haven't done so, please complete a survey and encourage others in your networks to do so. It's open until the end of December this year. So just a little plug there. We've also planning a range of community consultations, which were paused because of COVID. Although prior to COVID, we had managed to do consultations in Morwell and Ballarat, and we're really keen to get back to talking back to the community when we can in a COVID-safe way. The government has also established a volunteer strategy task force, and members to that task force have now been finalised. So for us, the report is a really powerful addition to the evidence and will provide us with many insights into volunteering in Victoria, and will have real implications for how we think about new government policies and programs. For example, findings like that the 2.3 million Victorians who volunteered in 2019, 45% participated in informal volunteering, whereas 40% participated in formal volunteering roles. There is really an opportunity to explore what can be done to recognise and acknowledge the work and hard work of Victorians who volunteer informally, people who help their neighbours in times of need, for example, by sharing hot meals, or neighbours living by themselves who are isolated, especially during COVID. So recognising informal volunteering is particularly important in understanding volunteering in our culturally diverse communities, and gives us some clues on how we may recognise, celebrate and promote inclusive volunteering. And that's just one of the many insights that I think this report really opens up and helps us to ask questions and opens up areas for investigation. It really also provides an opportunity to dive deeper into the challenges and strategic opportunities to plan for the future of volunteering in Victoria. For example, we can ask ourselves questions like, what will volunteering look like in the future, say in 10 or 20 years from now? What will be the impacts of the digital age or impacts of an ageing population, automation or climate change? And how do we really tackle diversity? So these are the big questions that we'll be asking ourselves, and I think that the State of Volunteering report is just another step along the path to helping us find the answers.
Thank you, Nicola. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your contribution to our introduction there. Next, I'd like to welcome Sasha to our panel this morning. Sasha is the Senior Manager of Volunteer Services at the Brotherhood of St Laurence. Sasha specialises in volunteerism, program quality and development. Her work experience crosses international and community development, emergency services, law and community cultural development. Her project and event outcomes include public events, team workshops, legal research, advocacy, educational resource development. Sasha was also one of our advisory group members with Tracey that really interrogated and gave a lot of real life to the report. And we're really grateful for that level of support that she provided. Welcome, Sasha.
Thank you, Scott. That's a very kind introduction. Hi, everyone. I thought what I'd do is maybe give you a quick introduction to how volunteerism works at BSL, a bit of a sketch of how we run our programs. I'm aware we're talking to a group of people who are, of course, sector professionals, and between us all, we've got hundreds, if not thousands of hours of lived experience of managing volunteer workforces, and of course the people who manage those workforces as well. So at BSL, Volunteer Services is a small team that sits in the middle of a really diverse programmatic structure. So we cover a lot of different services, aged care. We've got a retail network of 22 stores. We have youth focused programs, children and parents focused programs, also NDIS programs, and of course we also have volunteers involved in project work throughout central and shared services for BSL. So there are approximately 3,000 staff, volunteers and employees combined, and Volunteer Services provides the recruitment, onboarding, compliance checking, screening and managing that central record to support the 70 plus managers who manage volunteers throughout BSL through the different programs. We also provide manager guidance and capability building and advice to programs on structuring their volunteer workforce. In addition to that, we provide generally annual recognition events and initiatives throughout the organisation direct to our volunteer base. So maybe just a point there about what my connection is with the report. So Scott pointed out that I was part of the reference group. We had a great time. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege to connect with people around the data as it came out and have the chance to really chat together about that and consider how it met with the practice, of course, that we see every day, and those of you who are watching at the moment are working in every day. So it just happened actually that I was producing a micro version of the State of Volunteering report for BSL, and as coincidence would have it, I just happened to be pre-COVID times at Volunteering Victoria and ran into Paul actually in a meeting and realised that there was this kind of wonderful confluence of events going on, that the State of Volunteering in Victoria report was coming out, and that I really wanted to be a part of that. So I put my hand up very quickly to be part of the reference group, and then the other thing I did was got on the bandwagon with the name as well. So BSL produced its State of Volunteering report, and I guess that's where I probably want to close in my intro, is that what I'd love to see come out of this report is that it actually stimulates a proliferation of data and evidence that happens at the organisational level, and that we use it maybe as our base plate or our cornerstone, so that we can all sort of start talking at the same time, in the same way, in the same language about the value of volunteering. That's me. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Sasha, and privilege that we can have you here this morning. Now, our last guest this morning is Tracey O'Neill. Now, Tracey, I believe most people would know, she's a prolific advocate for our profession. She's just an incredible energy, and probably does 1 or 2 webinars a week at the moment, given her social media. Last week I was doing one, and who else but Tracey O'Neill had already done one on the same topic. So let me talk about Tracey. She's Manager of Volunteer Engagement at Austin Health. She is a social worker with 19 years experience in the not-for-profit health and government sectors, initially with organisations supporting children and young people, and most recently in large health services. Tracey has experience in managing large volunteer teams and local, state and federal-based organisations, strategic and operational program development, and implementing a range of management tools, including policies, procedures, quality control, continuous improvement initiatives. She is, as I say, one of the most passionate people I know about advancing our engagement profession. Welcome, Tracey.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you. I won't take up too much time. I guess I just wanted to reiterate what everyone else has said. I think this is going to be an incredible resource for our sector, alongside the strategy that will come out as well. I think we're going to have some incredible tools. The biggest thing for me, I guess, is I am really passionate about advancing volunteer engagement profession, but also volunteerism itself. And I think that having this resource, having this data, and as Sasha said, using this as a tool to create more data and more valuable data is going to be phenomenal for our sector. And I know we've got a number of questions that cover how we might do that. And so I guess I just wanted to spend 30 seconds just to say a big shout out to the rest of the reference group who aren't here on the conversation, because everybody contributed to this document. So to Andrea, Sue, Neve, let me say their full names because then you'll know who they are. So to Andrea Matheson, Sue Dunn, Neve Condren, Sharon Walsh, Bradley Smith, get well soon, Bradley, Renee Mazzioni and Sue Reagan, and the team that's here today. We really did kind of make sure that the document was going to be something that is valuable and useful for our sector, and something that we can all be really proud of. So.
Thank you, Tracey, and thanks for acknowledging the rest of the reference group there. It has been a really great bunch of people that have been tirelessly interrogating the data and the findings. At this time, I'd also like to acknowledge Dom. Dom has been VV's lead author on this report. His fingerprints are all over this report, and he has been the best project manager one could ask to deliver this report. He is just gone above and beyond and really synthesized so many aspects of what has been a comprehensive and complex at times report. Thank you very much, Dom. Now, we will go into a Q&A here, and I've got two questions for Sasha and Tracey to start with, and then I'm going to ask the same or a similar question to Nicola and Kylee. And the first question is about the big $60 billion, nearly $60 billion in value that volunteering provides the state. Now, obviously, we don't like to recognise volunteerism simply in dollars and cents. However, we certainly don't want to also give the impression that volunteers should be used to cut costs and deliver services that paid employees should be doing. So Sasha and Tracey, my first question to you both is, do you think this valuation is a game changer? Will it change how the volunteering sector is positioned?
Do you want to start, Tracey?
Sure. I think it will. And I guess the great thing about this document is, there is data in there about, cost replacement of volunteers. But alongside that sits this $3.70, return on investment. I think it's a huge game changer. I think for one, it allows us to have this, this common language and this advocacy tool that we can all start using in our organisations, in our funding requests and grant submissions and things like this. And when we're lobbying, or speaking to the government about the kind of programs that we feel volunteers can contribute to. And I think, it allows us to move away from just talking about, what we would pay or what we would have to pay if we weren't engaging volunteers in our program. So I think it's a huge game changer in terms of us being able to change our perspective and hopefully change our funders and our executives and senior leadership's perspective as well.
Scott, you mentioned that we don't like to just talk about the value of volunteering in dollar terms, but I guess I would challenge that statement and say that we maybe haven't spoken enough about the value of volunteering, and that what's so wonderful about this report is that we do have a dollar value on it. We can say, look at the contribution, it's previously been hidden. This is what is driving, our state, our projects, the social work that we're doing, the benefits that we're bringing to community is through this extraordinary contribution by, volunteers and VIOs. And I guess my the other point I'd make is really that it's so important for us. So much of what we do as volunteer coordinators or people that drive volunteerism within our organisations is advocate for volunteering, and this gives us a very powerful tool, a very powerful snapshot. It also helps us assist our own decision makers in weighing up a whole bunch of different projects and programs. Where do you put those resources? Because of course in our sector, everything is worthy, everything's great. So being able to provide our decision makers with the information they need to decide what happens when what happens next is so important.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sasha. Now, don't forget, people that are tuning in from wherever you are, that questions are still welcome at any time through the Q&A box here, and we'll try and ship them out to the panel to chew on at the same time. Question for Nicola and Kylee. Let's talk more about this return on investment. How does ROI fit within your worldview, both within government and when talking to your board, Kylee? I mean, what's your response to $3.70 and the ROI?
Well, in Paul's comment, he used the Friday night at the casino, but I'd challenge anyone to get $3.70 return from any financial investment around the world at the moment. So I think in that context, it's really significant. It is a great figure, and I think organisations, certainly Ardoch does, and there's others that do, have used hours volunteered and ABS hourly rate as a proxy for the value, and that's been really important. And actually that's meaningful to funders, and it's not the be all and end all of the conversation, but it is a great anchor to start the conversation. And I think it really reinforces the justification for why organisations would invest in staff with professional skills to mobilise volunteers. You know, I mean, they're very few and far between, but occasionally you'll hear someone might say, well, you know, why do I need to invest? You know, volunteers, you don't pay them. And it's, you know, I think I'm among friends here where I can say volunteers are cheap, but they're not free. You know, it's myth busting. And I think to be able to demonstrate that really genuine return, and that's without the intangible benefits, which the report picks up on, you know, in terms of well-being to the volunteer, well-being to the community. So I think it's a great anchor. It's a place to start the conversation if you haven't been able to get into the conversation. And we've seen it make a difference to the conversations funders are willing to have.
And Scott, I would just echo the sentiment that the $3.70 return on investment is a pretty powerful figure, and as panelists have said, it's powerful in your organisations. Obviously, from where we're coming from, we're thinking about the whole sector and the Victorian government's input and support for volunteering more broadly. So that ROI made us sit up and take notice. We also sat up and took notice at the finding that if volunteers were paid, the sector would be equal to 1.5 times the size of the Victorian government sector and nearly half the size of the Victorian government sector. So there is no doubt that the impact of volunteering in our local communities is significant, and this is something we've all always known, but what's really nice is that we now have a metric or some metrics to really back that up, and really it's part of my job and it's part of our job in the department to develop advice for government, and we're increasingly being required to bring as much evidence from all sources to the table to support their decision making. So really for us, the ability to put a quantitative value on volunteering will be a really powerful part of how we make our case to government going forward in future in thinking about what support we bring to bear to the volunteering sector. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm echoing all my other panellists and saying it would be really powerful and really thinking about it in terms of how we talk to government at scale.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Nicola. Next question is around skill development, which is a topic that most governments like to hear about, which is, in the report, we found that VIOs use a range of strategies to develop the skills of volunteers. Some of the figures stick out. For example, over 40% of VIOs provide statements of volunteering references, which suggests volunteering is a common means of supporting people into their careers. We also found that only 10% are motivated to volunteer, primarily to develop new skills and learning for a pathway. So there's a bit of a mismatch between volunteer motivations and the capability of VIOs to develop their careers. Tracey and Kylee, do these findings suggest there are opportunities for our sector and for Victorians in general for more widespread recognition of the skills you can develop through volunteering?
I definitely do, Scott. I think sometimes, and if I speak from personal experience, I haven't always sat down and matched I guess, the activities that we're doing in our organisation with the motivations of our volunteers that they're saying. So for me, I guess the opportunity is around thinking about, do potential volunteers know that volunteering can be a pathway to employment or support a pathway to employment and skill development? Because sometimes we don't necessarily advertise things that way or talk about our roles that way. We focus on some of the, some of those top 3 things around, creating social connections and giving back to the community. So for me, it's really made me start thinking about how we will remarket our program and get people thinking about how the kind of roles that we develop may support skill development and pathways to employment. And conversely, also help our team to think about what kind of new roles can we create that is going to support people who are looking for pathways to employment. Certainly we know in a COVID normal situation, there's going to be a lot of people who are looking for employment, and how can we rethink the way we're talking about the opportunities that we have to support these people to get into volunteering.
And I just add to that, Scott. I definitely think yes. There is maybe a but that I will add in a moment. But talking to a couple of our volunteers late last week, over the COVID period, one of the things that Ardoch has been doing to try and keep our volunteers engaged when they haven't been able to physically go into classrooms, and remote learning has really impacted our ability to provide some of our programs. Has been the professional development sessions that we've been running virtually, and volunteers saying how valuable that has been to them, and probably almost, I think, a sense of underappreciation of a recognition on their part of just how much of a value add that is to them. And I guess for as a CEO in a not-for-profit, it's clear that we want as skilled a volunteer and paid workforce as possible. And that providing that training and skill development helps attract people to our organisation, that's a great thing. My but it's about that helping to retain that skilled volunteer in the organisation and actually adding value to us as an organisation. It's a fantastic byproduct. It's a win-win-win for the volunteer, for our organisation and the community if volunteers acquire and develop more skills. But it first and foremost has to benefit the communities we're serving and the advancement of our mission. So if we can attract volunteers who want to stay for the long haul because of that, and in some cases move into paid staff, as has happened in, I know, our organisation, I'm sure in Tracey's and others. And there's some really good overseas evidence of some large corporate, what we'd call service learning programs, where they've been able to demonstrate that the investment in that volunteer work has actually added as much, if not more, value than some of the traditional corporate professional development programs, but they're often more around what we call the softer skills of communication, collaboration. We see it a lot with newly arrived migrants wanting to contribute to the community, practice their English, engage with others. So that's really, really valuable. And I think, we need to invest in, and I think Tracey's right, how you market that is important, but I think it has to be in such a way that, we need you to be contributing to our organisation, and that's part of our social contract with you that we'll do it. But, we can't simply be the place where people come to acquire their skills so they can go and get paid work. That's not what we're here for, and I think it's really important to be open and honest about that as well.
Yeah, great point, Kylee. Just on that note, there's a comment or a question here by an anonymous attendee. Do we have or need to have a mechanism to ensure that volunteers are used as additional resources and aren't being used to substitute for real jobs, particularly at times of high unemployment?
Sure, I'm happy to throw into that one, and others can follow. I mean, I think always, the notion of distinguishing between paid and volunteer roles is always a critical one, and it's the core of the principles. I think we also have to acknowledge that that's not necessarily going to look the same in every single organisation. And, often I you know, where I've most encountered it is often around sort of administration. You know, it's like, oh, well, that's an administration function. Shouldn't that be something that a paid worker is doing? Well, in most of our organisations, the dollars are not infinite. And so it's about being really clear about what the value add of a particular piece of work is. But I do think, and I wonder whether the questioner is coming from the angle, I think we need to guard against the risk that in a time of high unemployment, volunteering is used as a substitute for other employment programs, but it can be a very powerful complement to that in terms of people genuinely having the opportunity to grow and develop their skills. And I'm sure others can point to examples in our own organisation of a student coming to do some work in a volunteer capacity as a means of saying, hey, I can do this, and an employer who has paid staff and can make a judgment on my capacity is a really valuable addition to their CV, and inevitably makes them great volunteers ongoing or in other organisations.
Great. A comment from Cherie Draper says, the community centres, neighbourhood houses that she knows who promote volunteering opportunities in the communities do use the skills development angle in their advertising, value to gaining employment or developing career. So all great stuff. Thank you. Okay, next slide. We're going to talk about volunteers delivering mission. We found that nearly a quarter of our VIO respondents engage volunteers in the delivery of services funded by the Victorian government. As government and civil society partner to deliver mission objectives, from reducing poverty and homelessness to supporting endangered species, fighting fires and improving the lives of millions through various avenues, says something about how integral volunteers are as something of an auxiliary workforce to extend government funding and government priorities. A question to Nicola and Sasha. Does a quarter of our VIO respondents delivering services funded by the Victorian government surprise you? Does it change and improve the way we think of the relationship between government and community at all?
Sasha, you happy for me to go first? Yeah, great. I think what the report shows and sort of what that slide shows is something that we all know but maybe don't voice enough, which is just how integral volunteers are to all parts of the service system. So health, human services, education, environment, criminal justice, anywhere you have people, really, you have volunteers. And I really don't need to tell anyone in this room how important volunteers are in a crisis. So as we've seen with the bushfires and the pandemics, so volunteers provide emergency services and support communities in the immediate aftermath of a crisis or an event, and help and support communities to recover. So at its most base, I guess what that says to me is that we really do need to focus on what we can do to grow volunteering in Victoria. It's already everywhere, but what we want and what we need is more. So I guess with that in mind, and as we've been thinking about developing the volunteer strategy, we've really adopted the lens of the volunteer experience. So from the lens of the person or the people who are thinking about volunteering, who are looking for an opportunity, right through to recruitment, onboarding, ensuring that all volunteering is meaningful, inclusive and safe, as well as recognising and celebrating our volunteers and volunteers who might be transitioning to new opportunities. So really for us, putting the volunteer and their experience at the centre is a really powerful way of engaging with the issues. And for us, it brings into sharp relief the need to look at the social and community infrastructure that makes volunteering happen. As we've heard today, volunteering just doesn't happen on its own. There is a structure and infrastructure behind it in organisations and in communities. And so I think also thinking through that the volunteer experience means also acknowledging and celebrating that our volunteers come from all parts of the community, and we need to ensure that we're creating opportunities that are inclusive and accessible for all Victorians. And the ubiquity, I guess, of volunteering in service delivery is also an opportunity for improving service delivery itself. So how do we activate communities, particularly to support our vulnerable and disadvantaged communities, is something that we've been talking about a lot. For example, under COVID, COVID's really shone a light on the issue of social isolation and social disconnection. And of course, this was not new to COVID, but we've recognised the need that we need to address this as one of its impacts. So in response, we've stood up the Community Activation and Social Isolation Initiative in each LGA, which is about connecting people who need help to their local communities. I talk about this example not to talk about the initiative per se, but just really as an example of how we're thinking about issues and designing solutions that harness community resources, and volunteers and volunteering is central to how we think differently about government's engagement in community. So for us, it's not about changing the relationship between government and community. That's just so essential and integral. It's not going anywhere. It's really about shining a light and understanding what we can do to make it stronger and to improve communities' outcomes.
So the question, part of that question, Scott, was were we surprised by that connection between volunteers and mission and the fact that there's an entire volunteer infrastructure? I guess I just agree and pick up on Nicola's point about the fact that that infrastructure is so often hidden, and that it does, what's great about the report is that it brings that to life. You know, what does it take to manage and coordinate and run a recruitment cycle? Because of course the turnover of volunteers is high. In our organisation, it's double what our staff turnover is, and that requires a huge amount of a machine in the background in order to make sure that programs are delivered, kind of picking up on Kylie's point as well about the programs being delivered in the way we need them to be delivered at the quality that we need them to be. And I guess it's more about, and this is what the report starts us off in being able to talk about, is the fact that, you know, when we have grant applications or when we're running budget lines, the budget lines for volunteer coordination need to be explicit. They need to be straight up there. You know, you want 100 people to run that in addition to the staff workforce, and that's going to take X number of FTE in order to make sure it goes smoothly and everyone knows what they're doing when they're supposed to be. So yeah, it's kind of like, it's a theme I think, you know, that the report's brought up, is just the fact that we're now talking about things that have been kind of sliding under the radar previously.
Thanks very much. Kylie or Tracey, any additions to that? That's fine.
No,
okay.
Not for me.
Great. Next question is about the productivity premium. Now, when we looked at that 58.1 billion, $60 billion, a large percentage of that is underpinned, Dom, just jump slides there, please, to the productivity premium. We found that volunteers get a very high productivity premium from volunteering. Volunteers report that their volunteer work increases their productivity at work, e.g. skill and network development to increase their effectiveness and efficiency in their employment, while also donating at higher levels than non-volunteers. Question for Kylie first. Should we encourage more corporate volunteering, volunteer leave for employers? What's your thoughts?
Well, firstly, and this is a very geeky thing to say, but this is my favourite stat in the entire report. So Ardoch has quite a number of corporate partners, and they're all about workplace volunteering programs. And I think they're clearly some of the smart employers who they've self-recognised this figure, but maybe haven't put a value on it and called it like that. So that phrase is going straight into our promotional material. So there, Paul, there's a really practical use for the data. But look, I think if I think back to when I first kind of came into the volunteering sector 20 years ago now, I mean, the conversations around corporate volunteering have largely shifted quite significantly around that notion of collaboration, shared value, and how do we make use of employees in partnering with others in the community, and a genuine recognition that employees aren't, you know, employees and volunteers are invariably one in the same human beings, and that the ability to intersect those in a workplace actually adds enormous value because people get that benefit. So I think by being able to highlight this figure more, especially to smaller employers, I think the large corporate end of town have been working in this space and investing in it for a number of years now. But for smaller employers and business who their focus is kind of keeping their businesses running, I think, you know, this is a nice thing to begin to draw out. So I think where that's possible, absolutely, we should be trying to highlight the benefits of it and, you know, seeing where that can further take us in that spirit, of, especially in a recovery phase and rebuilding phase.
Great. Others on the panel, thoughts on productivity premium?
I thought Kylie said it really well then. Yeah, I mean, it's exactly that, isn't it? It's something to put in the arsenal in terms of being able to advertise what volunteering opportunities do for business, particularly around corporate volunteering with our organisations. So, agreed. A stat to take away.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, next question is on the hidden costs of volunteering. So this is an open round, so we'll invite anyone and all to speak to this. The hidden costs. The report finds that it costs volunteers on average, and we've talked about this a little bit already, so that's great, $1,700 to volunteer per year, or $6.70 per hour, which adds up, as we know. It has the potential, especially when volunteering is traditionally known to be an activity of those with a bit more wealth and others, to discriminate against younger parents. What does the report tell us about the cost of volunteers, the new organisation, or in all, please?
Scott, your audio was breaking up for me then. I don't know about the other.
I think we lost you, Scott. You might have to try that one again.
I think it was a question around what does it mean for the cost of of volunteering to our organisation, and whether or not it excludes people from volunteering. Is that right? Is that roughly it? Oh no.
Yep,
I think
that'll be
go with
great.
that, Sasha. Go with that.
Okay, let's go with that. Right. So maybe I'll kick it off. Great. Then. I guess what's really interesting, and I was interested to hear Paul touch on it as well, was what's the volunteer attitude to the reimbursement of cost? And certainly within the BSL, it's completely different. It depends on what your reason is for volunteering. Now, if you're volunteering because you're meeting your mutual obligations under Centrelink, then you are someone probably who's going to need to be supported to meet the costs of your volunteering, more so than someone else who is maybe fully employed at the time that they're also adding volunteering to their kind of activity. And I guess when I reflect on it, I think it's work for us to do around just accurately identifying what the cost is that the volunteer is incurring, and then being prepared to reimburse that, so that the option is there, so that it's explicit for the volunteer that we know that it costs X, and these are costs related to the organisation. Now, of course, then you've got to factor in which aspects you're able to cover as an organisation yourself. But even just being able to say, this is what's covered as part of your volunteering opportunity with us, then that assists everyone to have those conversations.
I agree, Sasha. And I guess if I can reply on behalf of, I guess, my experience in a health organisation, most of our volunteers, and I tell staff all the time, volunteers volunteer here usually because of the care they've received or someone they love has received, and volunteering is, I guess, their donation, one of their donations, but for some, the only donation that they contribute to an organisation that means a lot to them. And I think it also opens up a conversation that we can have with our fundraising teams around recognising volunteering as a donation. And as Sasha said, making sure that there is the opportunity to reimburse people where we can. We want to make sure that volunteering is accessible and inclusive to anybody. But we also need to be able to articulate, I guess the fact that this as well is a donation of time, but there's also a cost associated with that as well.
Okay, thanks, folks. We've only got 10 minutes left on this panel, so we're going to do a couple of last questions, and then do stay with us. For after the panel, we have an intermission, and we have a performance by the Multicultural Arts Victoria Distance Between Us folks. So look, please stay with us. But first, in the last 10 minutes, I want to speak about volunteering and COVID. COVID's been a major disruptor. You know, 2/3 of volunteering has been devastated by this. There was an article out of Volunteering Tasmania on the ABC talking about the concerns of older people returning to volunteering. There's underlying financial issues with volunteers not being able to fundraise for their organisations. It's devastating. What, for everybody on the panel, what are the issues in your mind as a result of COVID? And you know, they're in at least the start of the COVID response in our state of volunteering report. What's your take on COVID and where we see ourselves coming back stronger, hopefully, from this devastating time in our sector's journey?
I'll jump in, Scott. I guess I think, you know, first and foremost, I mean, is around the restrictions. So, you know, they're unless people have been in sort of permitted work roles, there's actually been an inability to volunteer. And I think that is separate to the specific health concerns that volunteers may have, because even if they didn't have any, their work has simply not been possible. So I think really it is that safety aspect that has to be thought about, and almost volunteers not be left to the bottom to be thought about in terms of when they might be able to come back and what training or support that might be needed to enable them to return in a safe way. And I think in some cases that will have potential cost implications. You know, I know one of the things that we're looking at is you know, what sort of online COVID safe training might be able to be provided in the same way to paid staff. Is that going to come at an additional cost if you're using an external portal? So I think they're the sort of primary things. And then I think it's about recognising that the roles of volunteers may be different going forward because the needs will have changed from the communities that we're working in as a result of the impacts of COVID.
Scott, I just wanted to jump in and say that I think COVID has also really fast-tracked innovations or change. It's forced us to adapt. So obviously, as I mentioned in the opening, we were able to get up the We Volunteer portal, which is great, you know, as a matching portal. But I think also in organisations, you know, we saw you know, a lot of adaptation. So, for instance, in the neighbourhood house sector, quite a lot of neighbourhood houses, you know, most closed down or only kept the houses open for really essential support such as food relief. But a lot maintained their programs, and I think something like 70%, you know, were providing support remotely through their communities, which raises a whole another set of issues around those who might be, you know, who might be isolated because of the digital divide. But it also meant that there was also still a lot of support being provided to communities. So I think it is a, you know, a crisis is always an opportunity, and we've seen a lot of adaptation through the sector. I think having said all of that, though, you know, from a government perspective, we're also concerned about the drop in volunteering and what that has meant for community organisations, as well as the not being able to do the normal fundraising is something that we're also concerned about and looking at, because if we're going to embark on recovery, we really need really strong community organisations and a real community infrastructure, and so we'll be having a look at that as we think about recovery going forward.
And if I could add, Scott, really quickly, I think it's really important that we keep talking about how agile some organisations have been able to, or we've all been, but there's a lot of innovation, as Nicola has said. I mean, I'm really excited to hear all about the programs that have been nominated for the state awards, you know, and if we talk about fundraising, there's a number of op shops who have kind of flipped their program, and they've gone online, and they now have an online op shop. You know, there's there's opportunities that have been taken by some organisations. I think we have, you know, a huge chance to learn from those organisations who have been able to pivot their programs and look at new opportunities.
Well, can I just follow on again from something
Please.
Nicola said around adaptation? I mean, I think that is really critical. And I mean, there are some things that we're now doing that I would question whether we will ever go back to the way we used to do them, because it's much more efficient. There's much greater engagement and attendance by volunteers. We may need to think of other supplementary ways to, you know, get that face-to-face connection, but it doesn't necessarily mean going back to the way we used to do it. And that's really powerful.
Yeah, great. So just briefly, somebody has commented in our Volunteer Week promotions, over the years, we've emphasised that if volunteers withdrew, then society would collapse. Well, during the lockdown, we've had a massive drop in volunteering. Has our bluff been called?
Great question, isn't it? I mean, I think the thing that's on my mind at the moment is the fact that until restrictions shift to the extent where we can invite people to return, we actually don't know what the loss is. So the people that we currently stay connected to through regular comms while they're unable to volunteer, as yet we actually can't predict how many people will return. And certainly under stage 4 lockdown for BSL, you know, we're operating at 20% of our usual workforce at the moment. So it's entirely possible that the bluff has been called, and we'll, you know, we'll see how we come back from it. But yes, as has been said already, you know, by Kylee and Nicola, it forced us to shift things online that probably could have gone online previously, so that now we have flexible remote opportunities that we've already demonstrated we can continue to operate in this environment. So it will shift and change, I think, naturally.
Great. It's you know, Volunteering Australia's research also put that the consequences for the social isolation for those volunteers that are no longer able to volunteer is having a really big effect. So, you know, it is a big issue, isn't it? And we look forward to, you know, seeing the return of our volunteers as quickly as we can as the restrictions come a little bit more lighter. Look, final question. We've got 3 minutes. And it's simply, what are you going to do with this report? You've already alluded to it this morning. One last thought, how are you going to use it? What would you suggest others do to maximise use of this report? And I'll just open the report to being our website, because I'll just draw your attention to our website, stateofvolunteering.org.au. You'll find infographics, a calculator. There was a question earlier about, can we calculate volunteers' hours through this through this website now? Yes, you can do it according to age, and it's Victoria specific, so it makes a point of highlighting, you know, what is relevant to our sector in our state as well. But look, over to the panel. What will you use the report to do? What will you encourage others to do with the report? Very briefly, please.
I think for myself, you know, I am really looking forward to going through it with an even finer tooth comb to look at what opportunities jump out at me for our organisation. And if I can just use one example, you know, one of the barriers that that people selected in those top 3 barriers to volunteering was family commitments. And I think, you know, many of us would recognise that for a lot of people, introducing young people and children to the concept of volunteering has become very challenging, given the need to, you know, credential volunteers and look at child safe practices. So I guess if there's one really practical thing that I want to do here is look at all of the opportunities that that come out of the data that's presented. And one of those will be, how can we offer opportunities for families who may see family commitments as a barrier to volunteering? One of many, I'm sure.
I guess the thing that I would encourage people to do is to kind of use it as a source of inspiration. Obviously, it's incredibly sophisticated as a tool, and it's something that speaks to our state. But there are pieces of the framework in there that can maybe used within your own organisations to produce similar stats, similar evidence, and that it doesn't have to be about complicated calculations, even if you're not working inside sophisticated database environments and that kind of thing. Things about, you know, the service traffic running through your units or even your position, and of course you can use the calculator online for the cost and the benefit of volunteering as well. But yeah, I would use it as a framework, as a guide to kind of consider how you can use it as an advocacy tool on the basis of your own information.
For me, Scott, probably three immediate things. One is we'll probably do a little bit of try and do some social media posts, leveraging what Volunteer Victoria do to share it. It's going in my board pack for next month so that the board get to see it as part of their sector readings. And I think there's a really great opportunity to spend some time workshopping it with the staff team across both programs and fundraising and engagement, and say, well, how do you see us using this report? What does it mean for what we might do differently in 2021 or add value to what we're already doing?
And Scott, I don't think it's any surprise for me to say, you know, this will be an absolute key input into as we develop the Victorian volunteer strategy. So it's about, it provides obviously the up-to-date empirical evidence on the social and economic value and impacts of volunteering. It will also enable us to, I guess, to cross-check and analyse and explore issues in our consultation. So, for instance, the barriers one is a really interesting one that we can really when we do resume consultations, really dive deep and understand what's under that. And then that will help us develop, you know, an action plan, which will be about implementing the strategy. So I think this is going to be, you know, pretty powerful input. It'll also, I guess, it does also provide insight into the COVID pandemic and the impacts on the volunteering sector, and that will be really important as well as we start thinking about recovery. So we're really pleased to have this report, and hope it's the first of many.
Us too, absolutely. Now, thank you everybody for your engagement this morning on our panel. You've really brought some intelligent insights that have given us some depth, some thoughts to consider. There's been comments and questions, and those that haven't been received, they will be included in our FAQ on our website. And just a quick note from the regions of Helen Hunter at Volunteering Geelong, the real costs are going to be in people and volunteers not returning post-COVID. The region I work in is seeing evidence of collapse, and whilst, and another comment just before we head off into our musical interlude, is whilst we continue to experience enormous social justice issues in our community, such as poverty, isolation, inadequate housing, homelessness, racism, etc., there would always be a need for volunteers helping others. The change has been huge, and volunteering will continue in a different way as people continue to inquire. Thank you for the comments. Thank you to our panel. Thank you to our attendees.